All righty. Well, once again, thank you all for being here this evening. It's nice to see a lot of you and a lot of your names. And hopefully this evening we can kind of jump right into graduate school preparation. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Marissa Miller, and I serve as one of the career counselors within the Office of Career Development and Corporate Relations. And so this evening, before I kind of dive in and we process through what all to be thinking about within graduate school, I will be recording tonight's session, and this will be made available after this evening for you to review the content. I will also be sharing with each of you the presentation from this evening. And so there will be resources and tools that I will reference as we go through tonight's presentation. And so I want to make sure that you all receive that as well. During tonight, I would welcome any and all questions that come to mind as we cover this content. The best way to do that is if you just want to pop your question in the chat box, and I will be able to happily answer as best that I can this evening. I will also recommend near tonight's session, or at the end of tonight's session, that I would love and recommend that we also meet individually. And so that can be really beneficial to talk through more of the process today, but then jump into what are your specific interests? How do you want to start preparing your application material? How to go about really searching for specific programs? And so near the end of tonight, I will make sure to reference the best way that we can do that. So we'll go ahead and get started this evening. As we go through graduate school preparation, just want to cover a couple of different topics. So in our time together this evening, I want to reference that we will be discussing an overview of several different elements of the graduate school process. And so thinking about, first and foremost, why graduate school? What considerations may you have already thought of, or maybe if you're still deciding if this is a route you choose to take long term. And so we'll talk through not only what to consider, but why it could be a really great option to pursue graduate school. But whether that be currently right after you end your undergraduate time here at Auburn, or if you decide to enter maybe your full-time job search and enter into industry first, and then think about graduate school later. So that's something that we'll talk about. In addition, we'll cover how to go about finding the best program for you. And so although I will be referencing some elements and resources specifically for Auburn engineering graduate programs, know that my office can also support you in finding additional graduate programs that you might want to pursue. In association with finding those programs, this really connects to one another, is finding applicable opportunity for you to be able to apply the knowledge that each of you will learn in a graduate school program through the coursework, but also how to identify research opportunities, which is the most common way to pursue your graduate program, and then associated funding opportunities as well. And last but not least, we'll wrap up today of what to be thinking about in terms of application material. So what you could start preparing even now, depending upon where you're at in considering graduate school and then where you're at in that search process, along with the timeline, knowing that in the current climate with the pandemic, there have been some shifts and changes in relation to graduate school cycle, so to speak. So if you wanted to start in the fall versus if you plan to start in a different semester, there have been some changes to those, but overall, what I would say is an overarching timeline for most programs that you may potentially pursue. So as you can see, a lot that we'll get to cover tonight, but again, if you have questions throughout, please feel free to pop those in the chat box, and I will be happy to be able to address those questions as we go. So is graduate school right for me? Something that I like to point out and think about is when I meet with students who are talking through the graduate school process, they most likely have already considered something about graduate school, whether that mean, is it possible for me to be able to go to, or Is it even something that I should be thinking about, whether right now and or long term? And then getting into the more specific elements of what I would recommend to really think through even before you decide to start to search for programs. So first and foremost, thinking about your long-term goals, whether that be from a career planning perspective. What have you considered graduate school to help you with? It very much so can be a fantastic experience to continue growing as a professional, to continue growing in the level and expertise in knowledge and discipline that you're studying right now and or plan to study in the future. But how does this align not only with your individual personal and professional goals, but I also like to encourage students to also think about from a career planning perspective, how might graduate school best prepare you for the workforce? So again, what type of transferable skills, technical skills, even the ability to work with teams, collaborate effectively. Those are a lot of elements that graduate school can really help provide. And so those are some areas to be considering. In addition, thinking about your current undergraduate experience, what are particular interests that you may have, what type of experience, whether it be undergraduate research, whether it be a co-op or an internship or any type of hands-on experience, whether it be in the classroom or outside of the classroom, have you started to wonder, I would love to learn more about that particular subject, that particular discipline, that area within some research that I've been doing. And so understanding that within specific disciplines, you very much so can be studying mechanical engineering now and think about a different discipline at the graduate school level. It is common to consider or to continue on. If you study civil in undergrad, you might continue that at the graduate level, but you also have the opportunity to explore additional disciplines, so to speak, for the graduate school experience. If you have a vested interest in research and project work, that is a lot of what graduate school will provide for you, but also expect you to have opportunities in. And so it very much so is being intentional that if you have enjoyed your lab experience at the undergraduate level or even undergraduate research, that is something that you're vested in long-term. Last but not least is thinking about considerations in reference to how do you go about committing to this graduate school program, so the time commitment that it could potentially have or that it has, and equally some of those financial costs. And so that is something that I will definitely spend some time on today in association with what specific programs you might have interest in exploring, what type of opportunity might come to fruition with that, and how funding is oftentimes directly connected to that. And so I think that is a very important element to consider, but knowing that it very much is rooted in the graduate programs that you might be exploring. So just some considerations, there might be some others out there. I do want to point out, and just with the understanding that I fully recognize where we're at in the year 2020. And so it has come up pretty often for students as of recent, if they are deciding between a full-time job search or graduate school. And it may feel enticing, and it may feel from a time commitment perspective, a better opportunity for you in place of that full-time job search. And so I want you to be thinking about ways in which a graduate program will help develop you as a future engineer, whether you decide industry long-term, whether you decide academia long-term, but knowing that I don't want it to be a fallback plan in place of a search, but knowing that it very much so can be a parallel plan, that you can consider graduate school right now, post-graduation, or later on in each of your careers. And so we'll talk about that today as well. So as we start to, okay, we've identified some considerations. There might be some questions churning already about, okay, so now what? And so I want to take some time to actually break down what most graduate school application processes look like, and also just what to be thinking about in information gathering, so to speak. But I want to point out that this is a process. So it does take time. It's not something that will come kind of all at once. There is going to be some waiting in terms of this process, whether it be from formulating your application material, really spending time and researching what programs are of interest to me, what institutions would I like to be at, and then knowing that the waiting game a little bit is as you apply, and then once being accepted, how to go about additional process along the way. So we'll navigate this together here, knowing that this will be more strategy to consider for a successful job search, or excuse me, graduate school search. And that's something we can also then meet individually about to really hone in on a particular component that you'd like to look for. So finding your program. So based off of your current area of study, your current interests, and also what you would like to explore for a graduate program. So there are some common types of engineering programs listed here that I'll go through just to differentiate, and then some additional ways that you can pursue graduate work. There at the bottom are some tools that, in sending this information to you after today's presentation, you'll be able to navigate. These are some starting points to even start looking for graduate programs once maybe you've identified, again, that discipline that you're looking for, equally what types of opportunities may be available currently at the graduate level. So again, up top there, you see Master of Science, Master of Engineering. Those are two of the most common types of master's programs within engineering disciplines. Maybe you are deciding a PhD. That's something that can happen directly from your bachelor's program. There are times that the requirement is to go ahead and pursue the master's, then into the PhD. There are other times that students can go directly from their undergraduate experience and be able to apply and be accepted to a PhD program. From the Master of Science lens, I noted there the difference between a thesis option or a non-thesis option. That's a really common question that we get often when students are exploring programs. The easiest way to differentiate that is to think about that with the thesis option, there will be a research component within your graduate program. There will also be that coursework, and that's a neat way to be able to take that coursework and then apply it into the research perspective. That will, however, potentially lengthen the time of your master's program. So most master's programs are typically 2 years. At times, a thesis option could add some time to that. The non-thesis option, you could still do research, but the coursework itself will be the focal point of that master's non-thesis option. Master of Engineering is at times what we might recommend in thinking about as an interdisciplinary program. So I noted at the bottom some graduate certificates that sometimes can work together at different institutions. Here at Auburn, for instance, you can combine multiple graduate certificates and be able to then apply that to the Master of Engineering. That will be coursework only for that master's, and that again allows you to potentially combine some of your interest areas and some of the disciplines that you hope to kind of grow within in terms of your long-term plan as an engineer. And then the PhD with a dissertation, thesis at the master's level, dissertation at the PhD level, that again will be heavily rooted in research opportunity and experience. So common ones you most likely have heard about, at least previously. Some additional options, the MBA program is something where students ask, is that something you can do right out of undergrad? And so something that I would recommend for MBA programs is they often cater to those who have some experience on their belt at the professional level. So entering into the industry, being able to gain some hands-on experience, and then being able to think about, okay, so is my next step going to be more of a management role? Do I want to start to think about some industry specific elements from the business perspective as well? MBAs, again, are common to think about, not quite right out of your undergraduate experience, but later on as you have some additional experience on your belt. Engineering management is another way to think about that too, which is more of a business perspective, and that will be coursework that you can focus in on. So those are just some initial elements to consider in terms of even starting to think about what type of program that you would like to be a part of. Something else to consider here is very much so programs are offered in person on campus. There are also online programs available. And so something I'll touch on here in a second is the ability to, at times, maybe you don't consider graduate work right after you graduate from your undergrad experience here at Auburn. Maybe you then start into a full-time job, and companies oftentimes may support your graduate work, whether that be graduate certificates, whether that be some of these other options as you're seeing. And so that very much so can be an opportunity. Question coming in is having a master's program, Master of Science with a thesis, stronger than non-thesis? I think that's a great question. That would very much depend on what is going to be that career trajectory for you. If you are thinking research and or academia long-term, I would highly recommend considering that thesis option to gain additional experience in a research capacity. In addition, I will say that if you were deciding your Master's of Science thesis and then potentially considering industry work, that would be an opportunity where you want to think about what is the experience I'm looking to get from this master's program, and how might that fit of the requirements or qualifications needed in order to be a competitive candidate for that particular position. So those would be some elements that I might initially have you consider. However, that's something we also can kind of touch on individually too, is hearing more about your specific interest areas, and then equally, what are some of those long-term goals to articulate. Is research going to be an added component that may allow you to develop new skills and new abilities that can then translate into the workplace? Or is it the coursework itself that's going to be the emphasis that maybe an employer is recognizing and needing to do? That would sometimes fall into play, is that if there are additional requirements or credentials needed, there might be a time that you do the non-thesis to gain that academic coursework experience to then apply it to the workplace. Another question, yes, so kind of thinking about the ABM program, so kind of the combined programs, the accelerated bachelor's, master's program, have a thesis or not. That's something, Taylor, I'm happy to follow up with you about. That would be kind of the difference based on discipline. And so we can look at that together, and I will happily follow up with you about that as well. But that is great to point out, is that at Auburn specifically, there are programs that we offer that allows you, even at the undergraduate level, to start in that accelerated version, to start taking master's coursework, that upon graduation, you will receive your master's program. That typically adds an additional year to your time at Auburn to do that master's program. Great questions. Everyone doing okay so far? I know it's a Thursday evening and we're just rocking and rolling, but hopefully this is kind of starting to jumpstart, again, questions that you have, or even what to kind of be thinking about. So again, they're at the bottom with the tools. ABET, one of the national accreditations to be able to think about for engineering programs specifically, that is a resource that you could start to search for specific master's programs by discipline, by subject area, and even interest. The next one, PhD portal, again, is going to be the focal point for more PhD programs, but two initial starting points that kind of encompasses a lot of programs nationwide. The last part I want to kind of point out is, if you are affiliated or aware of professional affiliations, or excuse me, associations or organizations within your discipline, that also can be a really helpful resource. There are times that there might be lists of recommended graduate programs or contact information for specific people that you might want to consider reaching out to just inquire more about specific programs within your discipline. Those I will make sure to have hyperlinked when I send you the PDF of this presentation, just so you have this all in one place. So we have identified considerations. We're starting to be thinking about how to go about identifying programs of interest. With that, I quickly want to couple that in understanding and recognizing the direct connection to research opportunities, and then funding. And so that very much so is a really great opportunity to be thinking about with graduate school, is that there are multiple ways to find support, both experience and funding at the graduate level. So research, again, very common. Even if you choose the non-thesis route for maybe your master's program, there will still be ways to seek funding and seek opportunity, even if it's not solely within some of the research opportunities. So here on Auburn's campus and also nationwide, within research opportunities are faculty-led and sometimes grant-funded. And so faculty members will provide and submit proposals to be able to continue on with research that they are passionate about and interested in. That will open up opportunity for graduate students to then be able to receive financial assistance to work on that specific research. Also, industry connections. There are companies nationwide that connect with institutions locally to have research developed to be able to provide for their companies themselves. And I can think about major connections for Auburn with NASA. I also think about Boeing and some other industry connectors that would be a really neat experience to have some of that industry focused material that you're working on in a research capacity. And so that's something to think about. Graduate assistantships, and that's something that I would think about too, is in the form of a teaching assistantship, and you may experience this now in your undergraduate coursework. You may have a GTA, also a GRA, so a graduate research assistant that may encompass stipends, so being able to get paid for the hours that you are doing the research and or doing the teaching experience, and potentially a tuition waiver, so the opportunity to have your tuition taken care of in addition to a stipend for the work that you are doing. And so that's an area to explore. Fellowships, an additional area, whether they come externally, so from, let's say, the National Science Foundation is a common one that is utilized in engineering disciplines. That will be application-based, but it is a way for you to pursue a fellowship, and upon acceptance of that, provide the funding for you to be able to do a specific research project. There are also supplements provided through fellowships at the institution that will just add additional funding for your assistantship. So just a couple different ways. This will be, I would say, program specific and also by institution. And so these are just some kind of terms to be looking for, and how to inquire about each of these is what I'll talk about in a second. Last thing at the bottom though, again, I referenced this earlier, your timeline or the way that you choose for graduate school could very much so be affiliated with the funding. And so there are times where students want to start in industry, land that full-time job post-graduation, and companies may already include that in your offer letter, that they will help reimburse tuition if you decide graduate work. That may not always happen immediately, but that could be an option. Maybe after your first year in your position, they start to help support you for graduate work, if that's something that you may consider. Great question. So when to be thinking about applying for assistantships after acceptance? It depends on the availability of that assistantship and how that is connected to not only the graduate school, but also the specific graduate program. So assistantships may be offered alongside acceptance to a program. They typically do work in tandem, but there might be times where you can pursue one as you're pursuing for the other. So all to say that we can look at some of those specific programs together, but acceptance into the graduate school most likely will lead to the opportunity to then apply for a lot of these opportunities. All right, so as we think about kind of how to fund this, or just considerations finding those programs, there is very much importance and a level of importance. And also I want to really think through with each of you how to go about building these connections. It is never too early to start to think about not only graduate programs, if that's something you're looking for, but how to inquire about some of the previous opportunities that I suggested. In finding these research opportunities, there will be additional communication and additional connection that will have to be built. Although, if you look at a graduate program and you see all of these opportunities that may be available to you as a student, you will have to oftentimes inquire about those individually. I will also say is graduates, the importance of graduate school is to start to identify what are your specific interests within that discipline. Research, as you may be familiarized with some of your experience thus far, is something that you have to spend a lot of time with and also have a vested interest in. And so you have to be intentional with how you go about finding this opportunity. And so it's very important to start to inquire, start to information gather, meet with faculty, whether it be again, at the current institution. So here at Auburn, if you want to learn more about what opportunities here at Auburn, equally starting to reach out to other institutions that you plan to apply for, even current graduate students to learn more about their experiences and to learn about the role that they have and how that might feel like a good opportunity for you as well. So building those connections, you will also obviously find a lot of resources from the department itself and those program websites. There will be times that they may have available assistantships and information about those applications or fellowships available. If they don't have that though, that again goes back to that first bullet point of you will then want to, in researching a program, researching what is available, what faculty members within that department are working on, and then you'll want to then inquire to those very faculty members, letting them know you are interested in a graduate program within their institution, and also have a vested interest in some of their research efforts, being able to set up a time to talk through that and be able to see if there is available opportunity. That's also something I want to point out that we'll go over the timeline here in a second, but historically it's been cyclical in terms of when to start applying for graduate school, when to start inquiring about research opportunities. But even now, even in the midst of a pandemic and in such time of uncertainty, added opportunity has become available not only at Auburn, but I can imagine at other institutions. So even if even if research opportunities may not be available as you apply, you want to continue to inquire, to continue to navigate what is going to be the best way to still gain some of that experience. There at the bottom are some additional ways. So you may know this or you may not. This was a hidden resource that I actually found as I was job searching to join the College of Engineering. But at the bottom of our main website, there is actually an option to search for a faculty expert here at Auburn. So specifically in engineering, for instance, you can actually start to search for specific research opportunities, but also what current research is happening. And that might be a good way to be able to search that there. On other institutions' website, if that's what you're inquiring about, graduate programs elsewhere, if you don't find an element like that, I think very much so if they have like a people finder like Auburn does, is being able to start to search for specific people and what they're doing at the institution. I will also include our graduate program officer contact information. So by program here within the College of Engineering, if you want to reach out and inquire about learning more about the discipline, particularly if you're planning to kind of adjust from your undergraduate experience into a new discipline for graduate school, but also to learn more about what current opportunities might be available. Alrighty, so kind of leading into which works really again together as we've found some programs, we've started to think about opportunity. how will I go about embarking on the application process? And so wanting to highlight some details and information specifically of how application material might feel similar to the internship or job search that you have embarked on previously or are doing now, but equally some added elements that are graduate program specific. So what do I need to apply? What do you need to start gathering as you think about specific programs? I will say that most of these elements will be required regardless of program that you're looking for. However, there may also be additional application material or application elements that you may have to include as well that will not only be institution specific, but also program specific. So I will kind of provide some examples, but this would be kind of the initial nuts and bolts of what to be considering for your application material. So here, the obvious, submitting an application. However, wanting to point out that you may very well submit an application to the graduate school itself. You may also have to provide additional application material separately to the department or the program of which you're applying. So you will find a lot of that information on the main program website, but that's also something I'm happy for us to meet together about, to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row. And that's going to be something to point out there too. A resume and or a CV. And so this is something to point out, that not only that tailored resume in terms of that graduate program, but this is where you really want to highlight your academic experience. Most importantly, those relevant projects, any relevant research experience, coursework that you feel like really speaks to your skills and your abilities to be competitive for that graduate school program. And so I will also say the importance of including some of your industry experience. So any experiential learning, whether it be co-op or internship or shadowing experience into research, academic projects, and coursework, this is a really great time to make sure to include that academic experience as a highlight. That goes in a second later with your academic transcripts. You will be asked to provide your undergraduate experience. So thinking about GPA that will be involved, and also to see what all coursework you've taken. Backup one, statement of intent or personal statement. If you are familiar with writing a cover letter for your internship and job search, this can feel similar in terms of how to prepare for it, but it will be more rooted in not only you articulating your interest in a specific graduate school program that you're applying for, but this will be a time, and I'll talk about more elements in a second, to really think about that long-term plan. So what are your career goals, and how will this graduate program prepare you for that? You may also be supplied or provided specific questions to answer. So I know some of you that have gone through the graduate school, embarking on the graduate school process, you may have had some questions kind of as a prompt that are given. So we can talk about how to infuse some of those as well. And we'll again go through more specifically statement of intent and personal statement here in a second. Letters of recommendation, I'll also talk about here in a second, about who to think about asking, what to provide to them, and what's going to be the best way to go about that process. An application fee. I am aware that some of the graduate programs at Auburn, that fee's been waived for kind of some of the coming terms. But again, that is information that you'll want to look for on each of the specific programs that you plan to apply for. And an entrance exam, if that is applicable to the type of program that you're applying for. So that may be affiliated with some programs, but not for all. And so that again will be something that you'll want to reference on the graduate school website. So statement of intent, as I mentioned previously, thinking about not only your career goals, your interest in the program of which you're applying for, but I want you to also be starting to think about ways to articulate your research interests, your projects that you hope to embark on, and that will really be helpful if you already have been working on building those connections with those new professors, with those faculty members of whom you would like to do research alongside. And so those can really work together, but you want to start thinking about that sooner than later so that you can include that in your application material. I want you to also be thinking about ways to highlight not only from your resume or CV some of that experience, but what has really prepared you to be competitive in this graduate program. And most importantly, what you're looking to gain in terms of growth as a future, as a current and future engineer, so to speak. So those are some elements to look at. So letter of recommendations, and so that might be something that you may have done before. So I think about, again, if you have previously asked for someone to be a reference for you, maybe you've had them listed on a reference page or as part of an application so they can be called to inquire more about who you are as a person and how you have been successful in terms of your experience with them. So who do you ask? That depends on what is being asked in terms of the recommendation. So letters of recommendation are common where people will actually write and be able to articulate based off of how they know you and how they've seen you excel in the classroom or in an applicable experience. So some common suggestions to think about initially, asking our current faculty members and professors with whom you potentially not only have taken one course with, but maybe multiple courses. So having someone that can speak to your, again, academic success, academic development, and then equally those transferable skills for that graduate program. So that could be someone that you're doing research with currently, also employers, previous or current employers. But again, you want that emphasis to really be focused in on the future growth of your academic experience, academic role itself. Advisor, so if it's your academic advisor or department advisor, it can also be a student organization advisor, someone, again, who can really articulate the skills that you have and that you've been able to display and how you plan to be an integral part of that graduate program. And then maybe your GTA or your research, your GRA is someone to think about too. So what can you provide? How can you help these individuals prepare to write a letter of recommendation, but also in the ask itself, I think it's very helpful to already have this information provided. So it's kind of a packet that you can provide in inquiring. So in asking a professor if they'd be willing to write you a letter of recommendation for a specific program, it is very helpful to have this information for them. The first two even more so than the third, and so that will be something I'll talk about in a second. So very much indicating for them what your interest is in these programs, why you're inquiring about the letter of recommendation from them, so how you know them best. The application timeline is something that's really helpful, and giving yourself that space and giving your recommenders that space to be able to have time to write this. So please do not wait to the last minute. Please do not ask like as you're already putting together your application material. You want to have all of this prepared and provided to them as early as possible. So definitely having resume or CV provided that can help someone recommend or write your recommendation. That way they can also allude to additional experience. Maybe you weren't doing research with them specifically, but they can still speak to that and they can still really highlight that. And so I think that that can be really helpful to think about there as well. There will be times that even if you don't have this immediately, it would very much be helpful to provide all at once is that personal statement or statement of intent, so that that faculty member can clearly articulate how to support you in that process. The reason I say this may not be immediate with the ask is you might start out by setting up a meeting with your professor or with your advisor to tell them what you're planning to do. So even now, I've attended a graduate school prep workshop. I've been thinking about some programs to apply to. As I am developing my material, would you potentially consider being someone that could write a letter of recommendation for me, or be someone that I can provide in my application to be contacted? Give them time to think about that, but then you could say, I plan to follow up with as I decide my programs, what the timelines are, and then my material to help in that vein. And I think very much so that would be appreciated. And you may very much be pleasantly surprised to know that someone would be willing, not only in knowing you, but equally you can provide that content for them as well. This is something that I, again, can happily meet with you about, is just how to inquire, who to think about. Like if you, how many sometimes could be a question that I get, is an application may say specifically you need 3 letters, and maybe you're having a hard time figuring out who those 3 will come from. That's something that we can brainstorm as well. How to ask professors, how to kind of inquire about that, and even how to go about that process overall in collecting all of this material is also something I can definitely help with. So as we kind of think about each of these elements in this process, I did want to provide some insight of when to be thinking about some of these elements, and knowing that this can feel really cyclical in terms of what I'm about to say, but I equally know that some of these may be tweaked based on specific program you're applying for or when you plan to apply. So I will say, kind of overarching and generally speaking, it is a great idea that if you plan to, let's say, graduate in the spring semester, or maybe like a year from now spring, it's a really great time to start thinking about, as you're entering into your junior spring, into junior summer, your time at Auburn. So kind of after that 3rd year is when you want to start to really be thinking about who you plan to kind of continue your graduate studies with. So the list of schools, list of programs, preparing for all of that application that we've talked about, and then starting to think about who you plan to ask for those recommendation letters. This again might be fluid if you are now, maybe you graduate in the spring semester, let's say, and you want to start the following fall for your graduate program. This also is a really great time to be having these conversations and being very proactive with this. Into your final year at Auburn in your undergraduate experience. I use the term 3rd and 4th. I know pretty quickly that could depend on program and depend on where you're at in your process. So in your final year, final fall, so to speak, at Auburn, so August, September timeframe, so kicking off fall, thinking about finalizing those lists of schools. So you've done the research, you've started to narrow down. That can be helpful. So you may start out with 5 or 6, or I've met with students that are thinking 10 or 15 schools. But something that was suggested from a student that I would love to kind of share with each of you is the idea that you can have a list of schools, but then start to differentiate kind of and start to prioritize and intentionally organize that list of schools. So are there some that you are 100% devoted to, and this is the program for you, and you want to spend the most time in thinking about those programs? Are there kind of a middle section that you are still deciding? You feel confident that you would really enjoy the experience there at that graduate program, but maybe you are still getting some of that information together in terms of opportunity, research, funding, but you still want to plan to apply. And then maybe that last category are kind of your parallel plan. I don't like to say backup plan. I just want you to think about some alternative options should some of the first set of schools not be favorable in what you plan to do long term. So if you apply for one and unfortunately don't get accepted at that time, are there additional opportunities that you could still explore should graduate school still be the full intent that you might look for? So familiarizing yourself with faculty opportunities, again, that goes into building connections. So starting to look at that material early and then start to inquire about those opportunities. Asking for those recommendations, financial considerations, as I've mentioned there as well. Into mid-fall, into kind of as we embark on mid-semester, really ensuring that you stay organized from the jump, but making sure that you have all of this in a very organized fashion. So checking due dates, checking deadlines, having your application material reviewed. So by myself or my colleague Jessica Bowers, we can be, I would love and welcome that, but also maybe some of your faculty members, some of your peers, some of your current graduate students that you may work with. It's always helpful to get an extra set of eyes on those. A mock interview, something I would recommend that our office can provide. There will be graduate programs and or opportunities affiliated that you will have to interview for. And so that's something that we very much so can help you identify how that interview looks, and then be able to help you practice some of those questions. Again, reiterating scholarship, fellowship, assistantship opportunities, and then going ahead and ordering those transcripts. That is something that has some wiggle room there, is that in applying to your graduate school program kind of in early spring semester, it is understood that you may not be finished with your program until May. And so ordering the transcripts will allow the graduate school to know where you're standing currently in your undergraduate school process, or undergraduate program, I should say. You will then most likely, upon whether it be contingent on being accepted to the graduate school program, will of course have to submit that you have received your diploma and completed your undergraduate program. So that's something that sometimes confuses students. You want to get that information in where you're currently at in your process, knowing that there will be some follow-up contingent upon acceptance to a graduate program. And then into wrapping up that fall semester into your final semester at Auburn would be submitting all of that material. There historically has been pretty cyclical deadlines of early spring is when applications are due for the following fall semester to be able to start. And so recruitment for programs and kind of information sessions with graduate school programs happen most of fall, if not all of fall, and then early spring is when you plan to actually submit your application for the following fall semester. Most times. That again is contingent, it's just depending upon your interest and the program that you plan to start with. And so that again is something we can meet with individually. So submitting the material, keeping copies, that's something I would recommend, is making sure that whatever you submit, and most application systems that you submit to, you will receive a copy, but having all of that material in one place is helpful. Checking back in with those that you asked to write a recommendation letter for. So something I meant to mention a little bit earlier is there will be times where the application for graduate school might ask you to list out those contacts for the recommendation letter writer, so to speak, or recommender, so to speak. And so they may contact them separately. There are also times where you just have to submit letters and there may not be a prompt, but you will be guided in that way upon application for the graduate program. So whether you get that information to your recommenders, whether the graduate school does itself, check on that earlier than later. So if the application includes that information, make sure you've already asked those recommenders. Equally as a follow-up, you may be the middleman, so to speak. So the recommendation may come back through you to submit with your application itself, or it might come directly from the recommender to the graduate school. And so you just want to make sure that you have that clear because it's not the same everywhere. So that's something to think about. And then into the final semester as well, into spring semester, is visiting schools. I put an asterisk there. Depending upon travel restrictions, depending upon campuses right now, it may very well be happening virtually in terms of setting up meetings with specific faculty, with graduate coordinators to learn more about the application process, and also getting a good feel for, maybe you have submitted application, but you want to be able to see the research lab that you potentially may be in, or you may want to at least learn more about that. So whether that be in person or virtual in this current lens, that's something I would encourage you to be able to do even before you decide where you're headed for the following fall. Responding to all offers is something I want to touch on here too, and that's something we can help do kind of as we wrap up tonight's session. Is if you plan to apply to multiple programs, as you hear back from each of those programs, you will have some time to think about that. So similar to an offer for an internship or a job offer, you have the ability and have time to think about the offer in its entirety to determine if you plan to move forward. That also goes back to a question earlier, is maybe you've been offered acceptance into the graduate program itself, but you need some more time to decipher if the assistantship that you've inquired about is something you've accepted as well. As you tie up loose ends and really decide, like, okay, this program is right for me, this is the research I'll be doing, the assistantship I'll be pursuing, you as a common courtesy will want to make sure to follow up with each and every institution that you've applied with to let them know whether or not you plan to pursue their program or not. And so that's something that we can also kind of touch on, but something to point out there. So kind of as we wrap up today's session, I'd love to spend some time and answer any other questions that you may have, or if there's anything I can kind of go back to revisit. So I'll kind of start there. Any questions before we wrap up this evening's presentation? And that, again, you're welcome to do the chat box, or you're welcome to unmute yourself if you kind of want to process through something together. I'm happy to do that.
I have a question. So if I end up doing the accelerated master's program, how does it work with transferring, or would that mean I can only get into Auburn's master's with that, or how would that work with that?
1, 2, 3 big.
Sorry, Taylor, it cut out a little bit in the middle, but let me just clarify. So what I heard you say, and if that's not correct, let me know. If you are planning to do the ABM program here at Auburn specifically, that would be set up solely with the program here at Auburn. And so that is very applicable, especially like in the undergraduate work. How to go about that would be working with—
Okay, 3 Mexican, 3 cheddar, and 2
current academic advisor to talk through program requirements and the process itself. You know, at times what it becomes is you inquiring about wanting to pursue the ABM, and then that adds additional just registration to coursework. Other times there might be documentation that would have to be provided as well. So it may not look identical to what I've mentioned previously of like the whole application process. At times it's meeting with that academic advisor to determine those specific steps.
So would that guarantee my admission to the graduate program or no?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm sorry. So that is with the ABM program, it is going to be coursework affiliated. And so when you inquiring about it, it would be the academic advisor will help you kind of recognize what are maybe some elements that you'll have to consider, coursework that you've taken, and also progression in your major. So there may be some elements that you have to make sure to have, so GPA and kind of success in the coursework. But that is a very fluid transition for most programs. So it wouldn't, I can't speak specifically to your program, but something I'm happy to follow up with. But most times it is just a continuation of coursework that you elect interest in, and then post-grad or graduation with that master's.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Great question. And Taylor, I'll happily follow up with you specifically to do that as well. Great. Other question, heavily GPA is considered in admissions process. So that is definitely an element, is not only thinking about from your transcript and from understanding your undergraduate major, what you completed, but also I will say that is something that is just a part of your application process. And so it's an element, but it doesn't have to be the only element to consider your admittance into a graduate program. So Yes, letters of recommendation and statement of intent. It's really the whole package. So there is a desire to have an applicant as someone who is vested and interested in the work that they will do at the graduate level. There very much has to be a foundation set for the success that you've had in your undergraduate experience, but it's also that ability, as you've mentioned, is with your statement of intent, what is your interest? How do you plan to utilize your time and your experience in this graduate school program to further your growth long-term as a professional? And so there's going to be a lot of connection to that as well. Great questions. And kind of as we wrap up tonight, as more may come up, I again will be following up with each of you with this information that we covered tonight, but also happily to talk through some more of these elements specifically with you as well. And so in case you haven't already connected with our office, the best way to do so for the remainder of this semester, we will continue our virtual appointments. And so you can schedule a graduate school preparation specifically appointment on Handshake, but also if you want to focus in on your resume a little bit further, if you want to do a mock interview. So there's lots of ways to stay connected with our office. You are also more than welcome to email me. My information is there. And I've also included my colleague Jessica Bauer's contact information as well. So again, thank you all so much for attending tonight's session. Hopefully it was helpful just to kind of think about ways to prepare for the graduate school search, and then happy to follow up to kind of dive in a little bit deeper about specific elements, what to be developing, and kind of some next steps as well. So again, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Best of luck wrapping up fall semester. And thank you so much again.